Well, I'm about to retire these pens from my desk, and I'll tell you why. I've enjoyed very much using them. They all have really, really nice nibs. But one of the things that I find interesting about them, and maybe I should have planned better, but that's the way I am, is there's always something a little bit delicate about these. And it's not about the way the nib writes. It's not about the structure of the pen. The pens are very solid. But there's just something about them that makes me want to be more delicate. I'm in the mood to be more forceful these days with some of my drawings. I want to be more aggressive. And maybe they're thinner. Maybe the idea is they're thinner, and I want to sort of, in my attacking drawings, I want to be more aggressive, and I think holding a thicker pen will do it. I haven't quite figured that out. What's interesting about these pens is, this isn't the right section and nib, by the way. This was missing the section, and it's a very difficult section to find. So I have a faux section and a faux nib in it. But where was I going with that? What's interesting about these pens are the relative uniformity from the section all the way back to the end of the cap. When you post them like this, there's not a bump. Usually the cap is thicker than the barrel, and that little tiny bit of difference between the cap and the barrel when you post the pen is sometimes comforting. It's one more little tiny bit of information that your body feels and understands. And when I don't feel that, and my body doesn't sense that, it almost feels like I could easily drop the pen. I don't know how better to describe it. It feels like the pen could fall out of my hand because of that slight thing that's missing. And it's a very strange feeling. I have to consciously tell myself that I'm not going to drop the pen. Isn't it weird? It isn't, you probably are all thinking, why am I subscribing to this lunatic? Why am I watching? Why do I continue to watch this guy? Because he clearly belongs in an institution. But it's not the case. I don't belong in an institution, well, at least not for this belief that I have, this feeling I have. It's a real feeling, and I'm wondering, now this is perhaps the reason that I am thinking this now. I do have one of these pens where the cap barely stays on, and it keeps wanting to fall off, and sometimes it does fall off when I'm writing with it, but I don't think that could conceivably be the reason, but that isn't the reason. There is something different about that little tiny bit of information that I receive and I'm aware of, or my body is aware of, makes me hold the pen differently or feel that I'm holding the pen differently because of that little bit. But what is nice about these pens is if I can completely block that brain cell from firing, I'm able to move up and down on the pen like this and draw mainly draw. It's really sometimes interesting to draw with holding the pen way in the back. First of all, your hand isn't in the way of the drawing. You can sort of see the whole drawing, which is more important in drawing than in calligraphy. But in drawing, you know, you're adding information over here, line work over here, and that changes how you look at line work that you've added over here. You're building a composition where you have to see all of it. And if I'm holding the pen like this, well, I'm covering half my drawing. But if I'm holding the pen like this, I'm covering less of it. And it's really a nice way. And a pen like this, because of its, if the cap stayed on tightly, let's say, if I can move back and forth like this really, really easily. And that's one of the reasons why I like drawing with desk pens, because there's no bump. And the cap is not going to fall off when I do that, when I slide my hand up and down and move the pen back and forth. So, yes, it's neat to have it all be one dimension, one diameter rather, all the way up and down the pen. But when that little bit of difference is not felt by my hand, it's just a little disconcerting for some reason. Well, I was going to talk, before I got just sidetracked by my own thoughts, I was going to talk about the difference between gold and silver. And I don't know why I have to mention this, because it should be obvious to anyone, that silver is so much nicer than gold. It's such a beautiful metal. There's a masculinity to it. And I don't want to get in trouble with people, but there's a prettiness to gold that silver lacks. And I don't know why that is. It must have been taught to us somehow. You know, gold is glamour, glitzy, blah, 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 where silver is less so. But there's really something nice about silver. I like when silver tarnishes. It becomes these beautiful colors, and of course gold doesn't tarnish, but gold plating will wear off, and then you'll get the brass metal underneath, and that looks bad, I think. Gold fill pens like this, if this was solid gold, it would be something else, but if gold fill pens like this, when they do wear, you do notice, problems like that right there. And that bothers me. That same problem on a silver pen wouldn't bother me, because it would still be silver. Anyway, I was going to draw a little space battle between these two, the Argentians over here, and our what's the ore. OR is gold, and argent is silver. The Orions versus the Argentians, and draw their different spaceships. And so let's have a little battle. No, I have millions of pieces of paper in my house, and so the Argentians I've filled with, these pens I've filled with black ink, and the Argentians I have blue and red ink. So here's the Orions I have with blue and red. So here's the Argentian battle cruiser rocket ship, and here's the Scout. This is lighter, finer, faster. This is going around scouting for the enemy. And we can throw up a moon and a planet and a star in our little galaxy. And then the Orions with their glitz. They spent more money on decoration on their boats. It's like, the British or any sort of ships back in the olden days with their gold frou-frou carved wood, figureheads and all that la-di-da on the back of the boats with beautiful wood-turned things. Like, okay, is that going to help you win the battle? Why don't you just figure out a way to make the boat go faster? So they spent a lot of money on this frou-frou, which might impress the Argentinians a little bit, but chances are no. They're going to say, what are they thinking? So that's their battle cruiser. Their Scout is in blue ink. But they still have fanciness to them. They have the rocket designer used to work in the Fabergé egg company, and they seem to think that la-di-da is what they should be doing. So we've got la-di-da going on here. Carl Fabergé worked for NASA. What would our spaceships look like? The Orions here have an interesting propelling system. They've discovered that if their astronauts eat beans, they flatulate. And they've figured out a way to turn that gas into propellant. So their entire diet consists of baked beans. And their spacesuits. Here's an Orion spacesuit. Orions have 3 legs, and in between each of the 3 legs are 2 sets of junk, but they also have 2 patooties, we'll call them, and into which the patooties are 2 hoses that collect the flatulence and convert it into the propelling device. So they're all tethered. They're continually, walking around on the ship, and they're climbing over each other's hoses and tubes, which is quite difficult, especially when they're in a panic, because they get in knots. So you can imagine how difficult it is to be on one of these boats, on one of these spaceships, sorry. So they're there, they're farting through space. The Argentinians, however, they've developed a different system. And theirs is quite complicated. These things here ignore this. I made a mistake. That doesn't belong there. What they've done is they've realized that springs are the best thing to propel ships through space. Not necessarily through space, but from point A to point B. So if they were going to go from their planet to their moon, what they do is they build the spaceship, and at the bottom of the spaceship they have a series of springs, and they, the spaceship is held. I have to draw it before it takes off. Here the spaceship is, and it's held up into space by 3 springs that are unsprung. I mean, they're extended. So with winches, they pull the spaceship down to where the springs are all compressed. And then depending on how they aim it, this one might be pulled down so that the aim of the ship is a little bit that way or a little bit this way. They can adjust their trajectory based on the 3 springs. And then, at the given time, they cut the 3 ropes and boing, boing, and then this thing goes off into battle. Of course, the problem is, well, how do you get back? Well, they have a spring on the front that's already extended out, and when they hit the place they want to go, they bounce back. And depending on how that spring is orientated, they can bounce back to where they came from or bounce back to a different place. So it's the slinky mode of sort of a reverse slinky. So they really have to plan ahead, really, because they can't change course once they leave. They're on that course forever. So even with all their ooh la la and their flatulence, the gold ones probably will win. These people win by, it's sort of like a billiard ball. They bump into things and hope that they bump into them in a right way to cause them to break. Anyway, that's how that works. Now, we all know that this is true in some alternate universe, because there are infinite numbers of universes. This has to happen. This has to exist somewhere. Right? If there's an infinite number, this all are the rules of physics are not. I'm not breaking the rules of physics, the laws of physics here. I'm sure on some universe they figured out a way to turn flatulence into a propelling agent. I mean, it certainly works even on Earth. If I have lots of beans and I'm sitting at dinner and suddenly let one rip, I don't propel anywhere, but the people around me certainly go far. Oh my God, they say, and they run hither and yon. So it does work, even here on Earth, but they could turn it into an actual rocket propellant. So, there's my thoughts. What do you think, gentle listener? I think the Spaulding Clinic is the nearest mental hospital to my location, and if you want to call them up and let them know to fetch me, you know my address. See ya.